So there's this very intense period of time after you disconnect from an abusive, toxic, dysfunctional, neglectful family unit, and you go out to begin your life anew, where you have a complete identity crisis. And I don't know how it looks for everyone, um, but it can be very intense. Now, I think, and I can't be sure because I'm not a doctor. I'm just a person who has went through this experience firsthand. But I think that a lot of the reason why it's so difficult is because when you detach from that family, no matter how toxic it is, you still there's a whole process leading up to that. But then afterwards, you're hit with this realization that you're not like everybody else. And in that you realize that you are your own center of the universe. You're your own you're the you're the person that you have to count on in the world. And that's really difficult because really there's no one that's more unstable than a person that just left an abusive environment that they were in for a prolonged period of time. So to be hit with the realization that now the only person in the whole entire world that you have to count on is you is absolutely terrifying. And a lot of times it's especially terrifying because when you leave, you don't leave having been prepared for years in advance to take on the adult world that you're going to spend the rest of your life in, um, with any degree of success. You don't have a savings, and you probably barely even have a job most of the time. And you probably don't have a support system because if you just spent the past 10, 15 years of your life in an abusive environment, it's really hard to maintain relationships with any degree of success or allow anybody that close to your dysfunctional family because somebody might see into it. So a lot of the times you leave with absolutely nothing, and you come to that realization that you didn't just leave with absolutely nothing. You also are at a severe disadvantage when you're trying to move forward to establish things. One of the problems with that is that from that point forward, everything that you go to put in place, every move forward that you make, and a lot of them are going to be wrong. Or maybe not necessarily wrong, but they're not going to be the very best decision that you could make because you're not necessarily thinking logically because what you're going through is a traumatic experience in and of itself. So you're going to try to establish very quickly things that are seemingly a part of a stable life. So a lot of that is a family, a house, a partner, children, things like that. You're going to have this incredible drive to get out there and establish these things very quickly. And the thing about that is that you don't know who you are. You have no ability to know who you are because you just disconnected from an abusive environment and then you took two steps out. You were not prepared to go into that world. So you're in this terrible survival mode and you're wide open to be receptive to a lot of things that are not going to be good for you. But it does happen. I think it happens for a lot of people. In fact, I don't think that I know in my immediate vicinity, even people that did not come from abusive environments, maybe just come from more like poor families, they don't transition into adulthood with any degree of real success or um, parental support to help them make that transition to be able to be self-reliant. I I probably don't know anyone immediately in my life that transitioned into adulthood that way. So, but people who grew up similar to the way I did, it's it's horrifying how quickly you have to switch from survival mode, living in your environment, to that brief period of time where you think you're good, you made it out, you're fine, and then right quickly you end up back in that survival mode with all these drives that are way out of sync with the direction that most of the people, most of your peers' lives are going in. And what can be really scary about that is that you, in that frame of mind, and without a recognition of who you are or any time to process any of that stuff, you tend to have this drive to establish permanence and put on your adult clothes. So you establish this permanence and in a joint household with another human being. Maybe you get married, maybe you have children very quickly. And now you're the adult and you're self-reliant and you're depending on yourself and you don't find out who you are. But then from the instability that you've created, because you have to be your own home base. And that is what it was that survival mode was leading you into, is establishing yourself as your own home base. But now that you've done that and you've been going out and having experiences and maybe going through some periods of self-discovery because you have that home base, you you change and you morph into something else or somebody else, or you open up things that you never had an opportunity to think about, or you you start to discover that you are probably not the person. You're not the same person that developed that home base. The problem is that that home base is a permanent sort of situation. You have developed permanence in those things. Children are permanent. Um, Depending on your views, marriage is one of those more permanent things. So when you have no choice but to become your own home base, at the point where you're going out and getting a chance to um, do some soul searching and discover your identity, you have already made lifelong choices at that point. And I think that that is really detrimental to a lot of people. And what's interesting about having established that life is a lot of us establish that life because we are hardwired to be the adultiest adults because we were the adult children. And what I mean by that is for most people, or maybe not most people, maybe it's a very small percentage of people overall. Um, Adulthood is one of those things that there are rites of passage. There are milestones. There are mile markers. There are places where people have done very extensive research on how to appropriately do these things and how to appropriately make these transitions so that people have the longest people have the most success for the longest period of time. And for children who are parentified or who were made to take on adult responsibilities early, you're not even being raised by those adults. You're not even being raised by adults who had that upbringing most of the time, because you're being raised by adults who have holes in their lives that they have to fill in. And a lot of the times it's embarrassing for them. And when you have that shame and that embarrassment and they don't get help, then they bring in somebody that can help to a degree without without bringing up a lot of shame for them because they don't really understand. They bring children in because children don't know what the hell's going on. And they can be trained to help with certain things to a degree, and the adult doesn't really have to own up to the fact that maybe they don't know what they're doing. Because a child, they don't have to explain themselves to a child. A child, in a lot of situations, is very eager to help. Long term, though, that child, even though they've taken on responsibilities of adulthood very early in life, and they're sort of these weird honorary members of the adult club, they're not any better prepared for real adulthood than the parents that brought them in prematurely. And that it leads to going and establishing a home base so that you can be your own home base and your own source of stability before you've actually developed any of the skills you need to thrive in adulthood. Um, and because I recognize my own issues with identity because of those sort of things, I wonder, which I think is more common, how many people go from the childhood situation to the own home base situation to having a partner, a husband, multiple children sometimes, um, to maybe losing some of those responsibilities over time, or going out and going through some self-discovery to realize that that home base they established is the epitome of instability. Because when you are your own home base and you are the only thing in your life that is stable and you have to maintain that, you can't afford to change. You can't afford to go out and do self-discovery. You can't afford to be different. And you can't afford to have a period of time where you're not stable. And unfortunately, that is just what's going to happen. That is just what happens when when you do things that way. That is what happens. But it just makes me wonder how many people go through the majority of their lives not really ever knowing who the hell they are, or how many people go through their lives after having established that home base and having sort of different reactions or different interactions and different experiences that shape them and make them think differently or believe differently or feel differently. And then they have a moment where they realize that they've built a home base and they're a stranger in it. And because you can't really you can't really afford to come to that realization when you're the only stable thing in your life. Because the moment that you do come to that realization, the moment that you do change, and the moment that you do realize that the life that you've made is not the one for you, it affects everything. Everything around you comes collapsing down. And it's more than that home base now, because it's the whole worldview and the whole set of morals that have helped you even build that in the first place. I just wonder how many people are going through their lives not knowing who they are or what they're doing or where they're going or don't have an end goal or something that they would like to eventually, a point they'd like to eventually get to, because they don't even know who they are well enough to get there. Um, because a lot of us don't know what we're doing. I don't know what I'm doing. I mean, actually, I did know who I was and I did know what I was doing for a very long time. It wasn't until, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4, maybe 4 years after leaving, that I started getting out of my pre-programmed things, and my things that I'd been through as a child, that I sort of had already developed a system for how to deal with it. And it wasn't until probably 4 years that I started encountering situations that I not only did I not have something established, but also there were no offshoots, points where I could even connect what I had to what I was experiencing. So, and that was horrifying. That was horrifying for me because I was the stable one and my only point of consistency throughout my whole life. And so reaching the point where I had to come face to face with the fact that I'm running out of prior experience and prior, you know, prior systems to deal with the things that I'm encountering in life, it was horrifying to come to that discovery. And it kind of derailed me all the way. So I just wonder, I I wonder how other people experience this identity journey, identity crisis, how this affects other people. Because I know for a fact that everybody goes through this sort of thing at least once in their life. But I know for a fact that trauma survivors are going through it at a very strange degree, probably at a higher degree of intensity earlier than most people do in life. And I am curious about the different ways that presents for each person that has went through this journey.